The film opens with the greatest escape artist of all time, Harry Houdini, standing on the edge of a bridge, bound with metal chains and ready to jump. In the background, Houdini mentions that while others seek to escape their hectic lives, he is always trying to escape death by performing dangerous acts. He then leaps off the bridge into the frozen lake as a huge crowd watches in awe. The film then flashes back to years earlier, where Houdini arrives at a brothel-like place with his wife, Bess Houdini, to perform and entertain the crowd there. However, seeing the rundown and filthy condition of the place, Houdini changes his mind and decides to leave. Nevertheless, Bess insists that they have no choice as they are running out of money. She then announces to the people there that Houdini will perform an act in which he will escape from a closed trunk while still being bound. While most people are entertained, one of them jeers that anyone can do it as the cuffs they brought are fake. However, Houdini, who always has a backup plan, tells the crowd that he will wear any cuffs given to him. Surprisingly, the person who mocked their performance turns out to be a police officer, and he throws some real cuffs in front of them. Initially, Houdini gets nervous due to the immense pressure, but when the police put the cuffs on his hands, he becomes determined. He then slowly turns away and opens the cuffs using a pin-like object hidden in his belt. This immediately impresses the crowd, including the police officer, and they all applaud him with respect. From that day onwards, Houdini became famous throughout America with the title of the greatest escape artist. He started performing several other shows, escaping not only from cuffs, but also from metal chains wrapped around his body. One evening, Bess mentions that she wants to do something other than performing shows, but Houdini explains that he doesn't want to return to a normal life. Instead, he wants to be the greatest escape artist in the world. With this, the scene flashes back to many years ago when Houdini and his brother, Das, are watching a traveling group perform an illusionary act. Houdini is so fascinated by the performance that he immediately starts dreaming of becoming a magician and making a living out of it. As days pass by, Houdini learns small tricks and earns some money from them. He brings the money home to his mother, making her happy. However, his father is not very fond of Houdini performing in public. Therefore, he leaves home with his brother at an early age and decides to make something of himself. Together, the Houdini brothers start performing on the streets and collect money to support their mother. A few years go by, and one day, while performing on the streets, Houdini sees his future partner, Bess, dancing for a show. He secretly watches her perform and quickly falls for her beauty and elegance. After the show, he approaches Bess and asks if she would like to work with him, which she accepts. From that day onwards, the two get along quite well and travel around the world performing magic tricks for renowned people. Houdini's brother, Das, who is still in the States, tries to copy his tricks to stay relevant. However, Houdini doesn't like this and decides to perform even more dangerous stunts that no one would dare to replicate. The scene then moves to 1896, where Houdini and Bess visit a famous jail and ask the head sheriff to lock him up. Predictably, the sheriff refuses, mentioning that he can only lock up criminals. In any case, when Houdini starts mocking the quality of their jail and wagers $100 on the challenge, the sheriff becomes irritated and agrees to do it. Here, we learn that Houdini wants to perform this stunt as it would gain a lot of publicity even without paying for advertisements. Meanwhile, the sheriff secures Houdini tightly, and Bess gives him a kiss before leaving. The sheriff suspects that she has slipped something into his mouth, but when he checks, he finds nothing. Once everything is set, Houdini takes out a metal key opener that he had swallowed after kissing Bess and uses it to escape from the jail. Consequently, the media goes into a frenzy, and Houdini becomes famous overnight. Fans even start recommending that he escape from bigger and more secure prisons. Houdini accepts one of these challenges and arrives in Chicago, Illinois, in the year 1900 to perform a stunt. This time, he is wrapped with metal chains all over his body, and even his mouth is covered with a gag, thinking that he had passed a key before while kissing. However, to the jail's astonishment, after just 5 minutes of being locked up, Houdini escapes from the jail without leaving any trace of himself. After his numerous jail escapes, Houdini became famous worldwide by the names of the Bound King and the Breaker of Chains. At some point, Houdini can be seen looking for prop items in a shop. He meets the owner, Jim Collins, who seems to know him quite well and also claims to have designed most of the items in the shop. Houdini is truly impressed with Jim's work, including the one for which the magician has to escape after hanging upside down inside a water-filled tank. A few days later, Houdini and Bess visit Jim at his studio, where he has created a model for the water tank act. When he sees the tank, Houdini jumps into the compartment with the help of Jim's assistants to check how long he can hold his breath underwater. Impressively, he remains still for a few moments and signals to be let out. Unfortunately, when Jim and his team try to pull Houdini out, the rectangular box on top of the tank gets stuck, shocking everyone around. Luckily, Jim has an axe nearby, which he uses to break the tank and set Houdini free. The scene then quickly advances to the time when Houdini is performing the water tank act live before a large crowd. He informs the audience that in case of an emergency, the head of the local fire department is holding an axe to break open the tank. Houdini then begins the act with his legs trapped in the rectangular box. Jim is hosting the show and asks the assistants to cover the tank. A few moments pass, but Houdini shows no movement, causing the crowd to become anxious. Subsequently, the head of the Chicago Fire Department arrives to break the tank, and when he turns around, he is revealed to be Houdini himself. The crowd roars in amazement as they have never seen anything like this. With Houdini's fame spreading across the country, the head of the U.S. Secret Service begins investigating him. They believe that Houdini is an illegal immigrant who has been deceiving people with useless acts. However, before any obstacles arise, Houdini is approached by Sir William Melville, the head of the British Secret Service, MI5. William changes Houdini's place of birth from Hungary to the U.S. and in return, asks for privileged information from the enemies of the USA and the UK. Acting on the arrangement, Houdini heads to Germany and performs for the great Kaiser family. He eventually amazes them by performing an almost impossible magic trick. Following this, Houdini meets with Riley, one of William's officers, and provides him with some classified information he heard while being around the Kaisers. Riley is very impressed with the work and showers him with praise. He then leaves, but not before giving Houdini a red book containing Russian grammar, preparing him for the next mission. A few days later, Houdini and his partner Bess can be seen performing for a prestigious and powerful family in Moscow, Russia. To win them over, Houdini cleverly plays a game where he will fulfill their wishes. He has them write down their wishes and lets the daughter of the family pick one. It reads the Kremlin bell. Everyone laughs at the wish as the Kremlin bell has not been rung in over 100 years. However, Houdini, being Houdini, uses magic to create a small rope which he lets the little girl pull. And when she does so, the Kremlin bell starts to ring, leaving everyone in complete disbelief. They even bow their heads to show their respect. I'm sure Houdini would have preferred money, but I guess a bow is cool too. The next day, Houdini meets William in London and updates him with information about what the Russians are doing. William praises his excellent work and also asks how he was able to ring the Kremlin bell. Houdini reveals that everything was set up when the girl picked a wish. He secretly switched it with the one he had already prepared, and each time the girl pulled on the rope, his assistant Jim, who was watching from a distance, shot the Kremlin bell with his sniper rifle. Before departing, William tells Houdini that he now wants him to visit the German ambassador and extract some valuable information from them. The scene then moves to Germany where Houdini is performing another stunt before the crowd and the German ambassador. Jim mentions that Houdini is locked inside the safe room, in which he has just 10 minutes of breathing time. However, in reality, Houdini isn't in the safe, but inside the ambassador's office, trying to find some important papers. Unfortunately, while he is snooping around, the ambassador returns to his office with a young woman, forcing Houdini to hide inside the safe. To make matters worse, the ambassador notices the safe slightly ajar and decides to lock it properly. Houdini, despite being an expert in opening locks, starts feeling the pressure as he's never been inside a real safe. However, with time running out, he remembers that he is Harry Houdini, the greatest escape artist the world has ever seen. With this motivation, he starts counting the number of locks present in the safe by recalling the clicks he heard when the ambassador locked it, and with a few moments remaining, he successfully opens each lock and escapes the safe. Back on stage, when Jim opens the safe, he finds it filled with anniversary gifts for Bess. Meanwhile, Houdini meets with William and hands him the documents before returning to the stage and thanking Bess for being his partner and putting up with him for the past decade. However, she doesn't appreciate the fake gesture. She confronts Houdini after the show and says that he only cares about entertaining the audience and nothing else. A few days later, Houdini can be seen standing on the edge of a bridge with his hands bound by metal chains, ready to jump into a pool of frozen water. The scene is the same one from the beginning of the film. After Houdini jumps, Bess becomes scared and anxious, but to her and everyone else's amazement, Houdini manages to unlock his metal chains and cuffs underwater in just a few minutes. However, just when it seems the performance is over, Houdini is swept away by the water current. He struggles for a while, trying to find a way out until he envisions his mother there. And with her help and guidance, he safely escapes the frozen water. Seeing her husband risking his life every time he performs his stunts, Bess argues with him again at home. At first, Houdini gets angry and leaves, but later he returns and apologizes to her for getting upset. He also agrees to perform only safe acts from now on. Following this, during the next act, Houdini doesn't risk his life and makes an elephant disappear like a ghost, astonishing the audience. After the performance, he is approached by the British agent from earlier, Riley, who asks him to visit Europe and Washington to gather some privileged information for them. Houdini tries to decline the request, but Riley convinces him by saying that his fans will love a world tour. The scene then moves to the Empire Theater in 1914, where Sir Arthur, the writer of Sherlock Holmes, is also among the audience. As he watches with excitement, Houdini performs an act of walking through a brick wall, astounding everyone. After the performance, Arthur approaches Houdini in person and praises him for his incredible act. Unfortunately, when Arthur leaves, Jim meets Houdini and gives him a message. Houdini reads the letter, which is from his brother, informing him of their mother's passing. With the news, Houdini is devastated and collapses on the floor. Bess rushes to him and holds him in her lap. After Houdini calms down a little, he asks Bess to stop his brother from burying their mother until he arrives for the funeral. In the next scene, Houdini can be seen at his mother's funeral, where Jim asks if he can contact her using the spiritual power he'd demonstrated in one of his acts before. However, Houdini clarifies that the act was just a trick to entertain the audience and that he has no special abilities. After the loss, Houdini's persona completely changes. He starts getting more involved in films, but constantly imagines reaching his mother using supernatural powers. He tries contacting several mediums who claim they can communicate with the spirits of the dead. However, all of them turn out to be frauds. Angered, Houdini exposes them and even writes a book about them. In 1925, one day Houdini again meets Sir Arthur and his wife, Lady Doyle, the latter who claims to be a psychic. Lady Doyle declares that she can help him contact his mother and prepares for a private sitting with him. At the same time, a fortune teller appears, and when Houdini asks her to tell his fortune, she reads his palm and predicts that he will die soon. Grateful for that, Houdini gives her $5. Shortly afterward, Houdini is with the Doyle couple, preparing to contact his mother's spirit. Lady Doyle picks up a pencil and writes something on a piece of paper, supposedly influenced by Houdini's mother's spirit. Following the procedure, Houdini becomes happy and thanks Lady Doyle for contacting his mother. Unfortunately, when Houdini examines the text written by Lady Doyle, he finds it to be fake. He discovers clear English writing in the text, while his mother couldn't speak a word of the language. He also tells Jim that it was his birthday that day and that his mother would never forget that. With this evidence, he declares that Lady Doyle is a fraud and exposes her and Sir Arthur through radio programs and newspaper interviews. He also announces that he will give $5,000 to anyone who can genuinely contact his dead mother. In 1926, Houdini visits Boston, Massachusetts, to meet a famous psychic who calls herself Marjorie. He attends one of her seances and exposes her fraudulence. Angered, Marjorie visits Houdini at his hotel and tries to seduce him, but to no avail. Before leaving, she reminds Houdini that he will die soon and that they will claim his spirit afterward. Houdini's next show is scheduled for Detroit, Michigan, where he performs the act of escaping from a rectangular box filled with water. Houdini has performed the act on several occasions, but this time he ends up breaking his ankle. After the performance, a doctor visits him and advises him to rest, but Houdini insists that he can't miss his show and decides to keep performing with a broken ankle. Later, while Houdini is with his fans, a man approaches him and punches him hard in the stomach for opposing Lady Doyle. Houdini cries in pain, but does not mention it to Bess or Jim, and simply goes on to perform his next show. Tragically, as he is addressing the audience, he suddenly collapses, prompting Jim to call an ambulance immediately. At the hospital, the doctors operate on Houdini and find that he has a ruptured appendix and very little chance of survival. One of the doctors approaches Houdini and informs him. He also talks about how Houdini is a great entertainer who made millions of people forget their misery. Meanwhile, Bess and Jim also hear about the news and become devastated. In no time, the word spreads far and wide, and Bess receives numerous letters expressing concerns about Houdini's health. She finally understands the joy her husband brought to millions of people around the world. Sadly, Houdini passes away at the early age of 52, envisioning his mother in one of the nurses. The entire world grieves over the demise of the incomparable Houdini. The film closes with Reverend Arthur Portage, the principal mystic in the New York congregation, inviting Mrs. Houdini to one of their meetings to attempt to contact Harry Houdini.